Shall we begin? Let's begin now. Let's begin now.
I'm just going to get a cup of coffee, everybody. I'll be about 5 minutes.
This is not a drill.
Repeat, this is not a drill.
Is that all you got?
Let's begin now.
What up? Oh, for sure.
Hi everybody, how are you all? We are live across multiple platforms tonight. We are live on Twitter, I think. I will check. And on YouTube and on Rumble. And if we're not live on Rockfin, I don't know why. No idea. Can't figure it out. But we are live nonetheless. Let me just make sure that we are. And there we are. Hi everybody. Hi in the chat. Hi Paul. Hi RSFO. How are you all today? You will be happy to... Hi Horror Fan. I'm very well, thank you. Very well. You'll be happy to know there will be no talk on this live stream tonight about any parties. There'll be no talk about any reports. There will be no talk about any of the nonsense that they're talking about down there at the moment that they seem to think is the most important thing. There will be no talk about that tonight. There'll be talk about other stuff though. There'll be talk about the NHS. I know that there will be some people watching who are in the employ of the NHS, and there's been quite a bit of big news with regards to their situation. So we'll start there, I think. So last week, something quite incredible happened, actually. Last week, there was a rather big march in the middle of London, predominantly by NHS workers, protesting a mandate that the government were bringing in to mandate that all NHS workers are fully vaccinated against COVID. Now, this was done already, I know, with care home staff for the elderly. And many care home staff lost their jobs as a result. I know somebody who runs a care home and they had to fire 2 staff because they wouldn't get vaccinated. And it was going to come in with NHS workers in the country. And now it's not, because there's been a U-turn. I want to show you a little bit from the protest last week. This was them outside Downing Street. This is NHS workers outside Downing Street. I don't know why that isn't playing. Start that again. That's our mate from the Assange protest from Press TV, I think he's from. So they're throwing their uniforms on the street, on the steps of 10 Downing Street. It's quite remarkable. There are thousands of people there. They're like 100,000 people, they said. I don't know how many people actually were there, because I didn't see it myself, and I know that many of these figures are often distorted. But it was a really emotional... I mean, this is a huge thing for... if you work in the NHS, this has got to be quite... Well, I mean, imagine... If somebody holds you down on the floor and says, "Okay, I'm gonna hold you down and I'm gonna penetrate you with something," you would rightly say, "Okay, that's rape," wouldn't you? And if, let's say, I'm your boss and I say, "Right, okay, you have to let me penetrate your skin with this. You have to let me penetrate your body with this thing, otherwise you're fired." Your boss isn't allowed to do that, is he or she? They're not allowed to do that. So why is it any different with these vaccines? Now remember, whichever side you're on with regards to the vaccine thing here, I want you to put yourself into the position of an NHS worker. An NHS worker who, and there's about 80,000 of them, they think, that haven't been vaccinated so far, that were due to lose their jobs, I think on Thursday. You know, these are people that we've applauded all the way through this pandemic. Before the vaccine came along, we were like, yeah, get in there. Yeah, fantastic. Well done. We were applauding them all the way through it. We were saying they're heroes, and rightly so. They are heroes, and they deserve all the credit that they're not getting. And so they've gone all the way through that. And these are people that, let's face it, you know, they're in the medical profession, so they're probably up on a lot of, you know, current affairs and politics. So that, you know, they know that the government maybe have lied about many things in the past, especially with regards to, you know, with war, etc., and special interests. They lie about things. We know the government have done this, especially in, you know, poorer countries as well. And there's been this massive push for vaccination. At the same time, there hasn't been a massive push for health and well-being. And there's been a lot of conflicting reports, but we're only getting one side from our establishment media. Any other reports that even if it's factual data, that might, you know, make people a little bit hesitant of getting the vaccine, they're shut up immediately. So from a health worker's perspective, you can't blame them for going, hold on a minute, the government's lying to us. Well, of course the government's lying to us. They're always lying to us. And have the opinion that, no, I'm healthy, I'm fine, I don't need this vaccine. Yes, it might, you know, they hope make it less transmissible, but, you know, we're all going to get it. We're going to have to live with COVID. We'll see. You can forgive them for doing that, especially after seeing how the government mishandled this crisis. No matter which side of the vaccination issue you are on, there's no doubt that the government have done that. You know, sending the elderly back to their care homes. And so you can hardly blame them for being hesitant. And it's heartbreaking for them. Look. I just don't believe it. You could read her lips there. I just don't believe it. Well, I couldn't really. I couldn't really believe that it got to that. I can't really believe that it got to that stage, but it did. And there was such an amount of people in the NHS that wouldn't get vaccinated, that were due to lose their jobs. Like I say, nearly 80,000. There's been a U-turn of it. And this is today from the Telegraph. Sajid Javid set to scrap requirements after warnings that jabs policy could lead to shortage of 80,000 workers. This is a U-turn on mandate. I'll start that again, shall I? So this is from the Telegraph. Exclusive, they say. U-turn on mandatory COVID vaccinations for NHS and social care workers. Sajid Javid is set to scrap requirements after warnings that jabs policy could lead to a shortage of 80,000 workers. Mandatory COVID jabs for NHS and social care workers are set to be scrapped, the Telegraph can reveal, after warnings of crippling staff shortages if the plan went ahead. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, will on Monday meet fellow ministers on the COVID Operations Cabinet Committee to rubber stamp the decision on the about turn. Multiple government sources said ministers are expected to end the requirement because the Omicron COVID variant, now dominant in the UK, is milder than previous strains. The move comes after warnings that almost 80,000 healthcare workers would be forced out of their jobs because they had declined to take two doses of a COVID vaccine. It's kind of incredible, you know, for an NHS worker. You had no problem with throwing us in the deep end, in the front against not Omicron, but against the full force of this virus that did overwhelm hospitals. There's no doubt about it. We didn't know how bad it was going to be at the time. It was just, you know, every country in the world, even if they hated each other, all rang the alarm bell. You had no problem sending them into the front lines without any protection whatsoever through it all. And then afterwards, you gave them a pittance of a pay rise, and I mean a pittance. A pittance. And then taxed them retrospectively on that rise as well. And then you're going to say to them, no, because you're not going to get the vaccine against it, we're going to sack you. It really does leave a bad taste in your mouth, doesn't it? The Royal College of Nursing, the Royal College of Midwives and the Royal College of GPs have all pushed for the requirement to be delayed, with warnings it could have a catastrophic impact. The jab requirement for NHS workers was meant to come into force in April, making this Thursday, February the 3rd, the last day on which staff could get their... But making this Thursday, February the 3rd, the last day on which staff could get their first jab in order to be fully vaccinated in time. The legal requirement for care home staff to be fully vaccinated came into effect in November. Like I say, I know people who have had to fire healthcare staff because they wouldn't do the same thing as these nurses and doctors wouldn't do. But I suppose they, I don't know, didn't have the weight. They didn't have a union. They didn't have a big march. They didn't have, I don't know, a scandal down in Westminster to divert attention away from, I don't know. But they lost their jobs. An estimated 40,000 people, look. 40,000! These are people who were caring for our elderly and our vulnerable. Under the new rules, they're expected to be able to return to work in the sector. So now these people who were fired for months, now their bosses are going to give them a call and say, yeah, we'd like you to come back. Obviously because they're short-staffed. What do you think they're going to say? I know what I'd say. I bet many of them have gone on to get new jobs. On Sunday night, care home representatives expressed fury at the handling of the issue. I bet they did, saying the flip-flopping had devastated our workforce and brought providers to their knees. The change of approach reflects Downing Street's increasing focus on how the UK must learn to live with COVID as the surge of Omicron cases fades. I really feel for these care home workers. Great for the NHS workers that this has been reversed and we're going to get some sanity. We need more talking and more conversation on this. That's how we're going to. I mean, if you want people to have more confidence in the vaccine, let's have more openness. Let's have, you know, not the shutting down of debate for a start, because that's going to make people immediately wary. It's great that the NHS, it's great that these workers, you know, have got a win. This is good. And I'm hoping some sanity is going to prevail here. And I'm hoping that we're going to have more sensible conversation. The shutting down of debate, well, that's not going to get anybody's trust, is it? Hi everybody in the chat, how are you? So, I have a question to the people in the chat. Do you knit? Do you knit? If you do knit, what's the saddest thing to ever happen to you in your life as a knitter? I bet you it's not as sad as what happened to this guy.
Happened in my life as a knitter is that I made a Twin Towers sweater before the Twin Towers were destroyed. The saddest thing that happened in my life as a knitter is that I made a Twin Towers sweater before the Twin Towers were destroyed. I made it in May of 2001 after I took a bus trip to New York, and as the bus was leaving the city, I saw the Twin Towers and it inspired a sweater. I never imagined what would have happened 4 months later. I barely ever wear it anymore, but I wear it once a year on 9/11.
If you have TikTok like I have, that has got like 9.5 million views or 10 million views or something like this. You'll know if you are on TikTok how savage the comment sections are. The comment sections, people are dark. Their humor is incredibly dark. But I'm telling you, what you're seeing over here, the sweat, it's literally just thousands, hundreds of thousands of people saying, "Nice sweater, Sam. Nice sweater." That's all really I've got to say about that as well. God, imagine that. You'd never want to knit again, would you? Have a quick delve into the chat. I don't know, should I do this? Holofan says the choice of how to have this jab or lose your job is extreme coercion masquerading as the illusion of choice. It's like I said, if I say to you, right, okay, and remember this is a government, the government and establishment that people know if you've been following the news. I mean, John Cleese left the country. He was so upset at the news in this country. He was so mad that the news had lost their minds. He left and buggered off to the Caribbean. So people know that the media and the government have just been lying to them for years about all sorts of stuff. So you can't blame people for being hesitant on anything anything that he said. Your jumping off points at this point, as I've said, should be the government's lying to us, and go from there until you verify, oh no, it turns out they're not lying to us on this occasion, or actually it's 90% true, but they're lying about this 10%. Do you know what I mean? So you can't blame people for being hesitant on this. And to say we're going to sack you, not only we're going to sack you, but, oh, by the way, thanks so much for helping us through this pandemic. Thank you. I know that you all got sick. I met one nurse who, she'd got long COVID. She got permanent scarring on her lungs as a result of, what had happened to her. And she got, the most adorable kids. And, her life was going to be different and harder going forward. And I don't know whether I'm not saying that she didn't get the vaccine or anything, but what I'm saying is if she decided, no, I'm not going to get this yet, I don't think there's enough information, I think it's been rushed, whatever. And then for you to say, oh, you've been all through it, I know you helped us all the way through that, sorry, bye. You're not going to let me stick this into you, this sharp thing. Why should you need to do that? Glad you were back over here on YouTube with regular live shows, Gordon says, on any Sunday meal. Thank you, mate. It's a pleasure to be back. I do enjoy these live streams, I really do. Horror fan again. When you only get one side of the argument from the mainstream media and experts are suppressed, that's when you know it's an agenda and not about health and safety. I wouldn't say no, but you certainly can understand people who are wary of what the government are saying. And Teach there in the chat saying people should strike. I said this right at the very beginning. Do you remember? I had somebody who was a prominent member of a workers, who knew workers unions and everything, and I was like, yeah, let's strike. And they were like, oh wait, now's not the time. Now's not the time? You're doing a really good AOC impression there. Not the time. You're thinking of the micro and you got the macro. Oh, right, okay. Now I get it. Etic Boxon sends 100 knock. Thank you, Etic. I don't know what a knock is, but thank you for the 100 of them. Cheers, Gordon. I'm probably not your favourite subscriber. You are? You've just sent me 100 knock. You're my favourite one at the moment. Cheers, Gordon. I'm probably not your favourite subscriber because of my views on COVID vax lockdowns. I don't know what your views are on that, but I respect you and I believe your heart is in the right place. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Etic. It is in the right place. It is, and I know many people have said that I should apologise for the way I was at the beginning of this pandemic, and my advice at the beginning. Go if you can find something that you really do disagree with that I said historically. Go and get what I said and present me with it, because whenever I say this to people, they generally just come back and go, yeah, you're all right, Gordon, don't worry. I took this serious right at the very beginning because, like I say, countries around the world that hated each other were all singing from the same hymn sheet and ringing the alarm bells. And I've pretty much looked at things going from there and changed my views accordingly. I took things seriously. I believe I took things sensible. I think I did the sensible thing, but I also didn't do what many people do and jump on one side of the issue or the other and say I know XYZ or I am sure about XYZ when I wasn't. I just wasn't sure. How can I tell you I'm sure about something when I'm not? Allow me to form an opinion. And these last 2 years have been bloody incredibly confusing. Incredibly confusing. I don't know about you, but they certainly have been for me. If you pay the news any attention, it's... What? I mean, I'm going to cover a story now. It's just... This is nuts. This is crazy stuff. So, there you go. Like Etic says, my heart's in the right place. Norwegian Kroner is a knock. Thank you. Seelu says, as I recall, your mum had been very ill with a respiratory illness when this started. Yes, she was. She was in hospital for, when this started. So, like I say, if people have got a problem with something I said or did during this, go and find it. Find the clip. And if it's just, think of it. Is that it? Right. I have to talk about this. Right now, as I've just covered in that. Oh, let's start recording this, by the way. Oop, there's nothing. So as I've just covered in that segment at the beginning of this. The NHS is, well, it's in crisis already without the 80,000 people who just nearly lost their job because of this mandate that's been reversed. But that's just the tip of the iceberg of what's really going on in this country and all the problems that we've got, don't you think? I mean, we've just come through this pandemic, and it looks like we're finally coming out the other side, and it looks like, you know, hopefully we're through the worst of it. But for 2 years, our economy was basically shut down. I've said before, it was almost like having the financial crash of 1929 or whatever it was, right in the middle of World War II. That's how much it affected the global economy, because it was the entire world. It wasn't just the country that was involved in, you know, wars. So, as a result of that, we've printed money in the UK as well as the US and other places like never before. And the euro, etc. Everybody's done it. That's what we do. We just print the money and then afterwards deal with the inflation. It's the only weapon, it's the only tool we've got in the box, in our financial toolbox. Inflation is being seen at the moment on the scale, what is it, 10% last month? It means everything is starting to go up. Everything is costing more. Wages aren't going up. Not of the working class people. Billionaires are, well, they're tripling their wealth since the financial crash, whereas the poorest in the country, well, since the financial crash, well, they're the ones who've paid in the last decade or so for all the mistakes and the greed, because of the greed, for all the mistakes the bankers made because of their greed, crashing the economy in 2008. So those poorest people are now probably going to have to pay again with austerity, because that's the only tool seemingly that Westminster have got in their economic toolbox, meaning the poor and the working class are going to pay for this pandemic more than the billionaires who've made out are like bandits. You can see it happening again. We've got rising gas and electric prices in this country. They're going through the roof. Nobody can afford to heat their homes. We've got food bank use off the scale. Since the Tories came in, the explosion of food bank use has been incredible in the last 10 years, 15 years. Homelessness is going through the roof. Walk round the centre of London, you can see them again. We got them off the street during the pandemic. We proved we could do it. They're not a health risk to the rich now anymore, so they're back on the street outside Euston. And obviously nobody's got any jobs anymore because the economy's in the tank, because all the businesses have shut down because of COVID and Brexit, depending on who you ask. Meaning the youth have got nothing to look forward to, knife crime's going through the roof, and oh, by the way, that's without mentioning the impending climate catastrophe that we seemingly sleepwalking ourselves into. So with all that in mind, what do you think the politicians are doing right now? I know. With that in mind, what would you do? What would you do? Where would you start with all that? Well, our politicians in Westminster, they've decided that the best way to solve all those things is to go to war with Russia. This is Liz Truss. Listen to her.
Are you working on the assumption that President Putin is going to invade Ukraine?
We think it's highly likely.
Highly likely! She said highly likely! She said the magic words, highly likely. It's highly likely President Putin is going to invade Ukraine. So yes, we need to send NATO troops. We need to send more troops and more. It's highly likely that Putin poisons Sergei Skripal. Do you remember? Do you remember it was highly likely? Do you remember it was highly likely that Assad gassed his own people in Syria? in Duma, right at the point where he had basically won the war, ensuring that powers greater than him would crush him. It was highly likely that he did that as well. I bet you if I went far enough back, I could find footage of our MPs saying it's highly likely that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. It's highly likely that the girl spouting the story about the incubator babies was, she was telling the truth and not a Kuwaiti diplomat's daughter who had been basically in acting classes her entire life. It's highly likely that, the Gulf of Tonkin, the ship was attacked by that boat. Highly likely.
Are you working on the assumption that President Putin is going to invade Ukraine?
We think it's highly likely that he is looking to invade Ukraine. That is why we're doing all we can through deterrent.
Foreign Secretary. Could you think of anybody worse to be put as Foreign Secretary? Could you? Maybe Boris Johnson? We're screwed.
And diplomacy to urge him to desist. That's why we are strengthening our sanctions regime here in the United Kingdom. We're going to be introducing new legislation.
Sanctions. So they're going to sanction, and this is what it's all about. This is sanctioning Russia. This is crippling their economy. This is making the people hurt. Sanctions hurt the people. This is making the people hurt because Russia won't bend to our will. This is what it's all about.
So that we can hit targets, including those who are key to the Kremlin's continuation and the continuation of the Russian regime. We're also supplying and offering extra support into our Baltic allies across the Black Sea, as well as supplying the Ukrainians with defensive weapons. And the United Kingdom is the largest contributor to NATO in Europe, and we are the largest European NATO supporter of troops and defences in Europe.
I want to talk to you about sanctions in a moment, but just in terms of what could happen, are you thinking an invasion is imminent?
Well, what we are seeing is attempts by the Russian regime to destabilise Ukrainian democracy. Last week we revealed intel.
Do you see how they skirt the question? Whenever it's direct, it's like, it's highly likely. Well, direct, oh no, I'm not answering that. We think it's highly likely. Directly answer, are they going to do it? Oh, I'm not answering that. Do you see how,
intelligence that showed an attempt by the Kremlin to install a puppet regime in Kiev. We've seen cyber attacks.
A puppet regime in Kiev. That's a report that we put out that America asked us to put out.
We've seen other attempts to destabilise Ukraine. At the same time, we've seen this big build-up on the border. There is a real threat of invasion, but we don't know what's going to happen. No one can predict the future. What we have to do is work as hard as we can to stop that happening.
So, you heard her. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. It's highly likely. By the way, for anybody who is aghast at her being a top politician and foreign secretary in this country, like I was there. I mean, I'm sure Liz Truss is a lovely person. Okay, I'm sure she's lovely, and I mean no disrespect when I'm saying this, any of this, but we've got to find somebody. We've got to find better people to be in these positions. Don't you agree with me? We've got to find better people. And what's astounding about all of this is she's second favourite to be the next Prime Minister. All these people right now, and I'm not talking about parties, as I said, but all these people right now saying Boris must go. Who are you going to put in? And if any of these people come in, including him, by the way, and say what you want about Liz Truss, hey, at least she's more of a favourite to be Prime Minister than Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party. You know, but is anybody on that list going to change anything? Look at all Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Keir Starmer, Jeremy Hunt, Tom Tugendud, Penny Mordaunt. Sajid, I think Penny Mordaunt was grown in a lab by the army. I really do. I think she's basically, you know, military. I think the military made her. Sajid Javid, Michael Gove, Dominic Raab, Nadeem Zahar. Who there is going to save us? But we've got to get better people in these positions. I'm done with these politicians. I'm done with them. Forget voting Labour. If your job right now is to comment on the horse race between Labour and Conservative, then you're part of the problem as far as I'm concerned. She wasn't the only, just to show that I'm not picking on Liz Truss. She's not the only, you know, MP who is talking about Ukraine and saber rattling the drums of war, beating the drums of war about Ukraine right now. This person actually made me angry yesterday when I saw this. I was really upset. My wife was like looking at me like, I haven't seen you this upset for quite some time. I was properly angry. Tobias Ellwood, MP for Bournemouth, Conservative MP for Bournemouth and chair of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee. Defence. I really wish these people would learn what defence is, because defence is here. It's not all the way over in Ukraine, it's here. It's not Afghanistan or Libya or Iran or Iraq, it's here, defence is. Over there is offence. He said this: Putin's annexation of Ukraine is part of his wider strategy involving China. Threat of sanctions and parking our tanks around Ukraine will not prevent an invasion. He's saying putting our tanks in the NATO countries there around Ukraine will not prevent an invasion. First of all, mate, it shows how much you know about things. Because if Russia wanted to invade Ukraine, they could do it tomorrow and there's not a damn thing you could do about it. So let's stop with the nonsense, shall we? He said it's time to show strength. Think Churchill, not Chamberlain. Like I say, he made me angry. This man did. I'm going to try and... I think I only need to show you this one bit. So I just want to zoom it in so I can read. There you go. That's there's only really the first bit of this I need to read to you. He said this in his article in the Mail on Sunday. Talk about projection. You know how the first rule of any propaganda is project on the other side what that of which you're guilty of? Listen to this. Listen to his opening gambit. All dictators need an enemy to distract from domestic woes, to justify their aggression and demonstrate strength. Who's got the domestic woes, do you think, at the moment? Vladimir Putin or Boris Johnson? Diplomatic talks with the Kremlin have collapsed. Exceptional Russian firepower now surrounds Ukraine on three sides. Well, first of all, one of those sides is Russia. People say, "Oh, amassing troops on the border." Well, it's Russian border, and two countries that they're aligned with that are on two of their neighbours. the aggression coming from the other side, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you notice, whenever they talk about troop build-up by Russia, they don't necessarily give the same gravitas to the amount of NATO troops that are going in that area. Obviously, all the equipment we're sending, etc., is incredible, and it's just a bunch of dictators swinging their dick. So he says they're surrounding Ukraine on three sides, but can we just stop and pause after that opening gambit of his in the Mail on Sunday to ask just a simple question? What has Russia actually done here? What is this aggression and this exceptional Russian firepower that he's talking about here? Who have Russia invaded there? Where have Russia stationed their equipment? You say two other countries. Why? Do they want Ukraine's? Why is it? Well, you see, it's the expansion of NATO eastward from, the old breakup of the Soviet Union. The United States Secretary of State at the time promised that they wouldn't expand NATO eastward towards the Russian border. And since then, well, I think now we've got 14 countries in Europe that are part of NATO. Whenever they talk about Russian maneuvers on their own border and inside their own territory, they don't talk about the American and NATO joint drills around Europe, do they? What has Russia actually done here? Who have they invaded? Not much aggression, really, is there? Russia's just there. That seems to be its only crime. Just being there and now being provoked into doing something. Whereas if you look at us and what we do and the countries we invade and our as he says there, exceptional firepower. You look at what we've done in places like, I don't know, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Iraq, Venezuela. That's just with the sanctions and the war, etc., the countries that we're destroying, people we're murdering around the world. That's not Russia, that's us. We're the ones who are enabling that. We're the ones who are killing them. If we were to flip it the other way and say, right, okay, this is obviously an American thing. I say NATO, it's America who are pushing this. Well, what's the equivalent? Well, the equivalent would be if Russia had got a bunch of countries in South America on board in an alliance and called it, I don't know, the South Pacific, the South Arm Treaty. We'll call it the SPAT, the South Pacific Arm Treaty. And we'll say, right, okay, it's Russia and it's a bunch of South American countries and they're all going to get together. And with these South American countries, they're going to put all Russian firepower in their countries, all pointed at America. And they're going to do it for, quote, defence because, of the American regime. You understand? That's the equivalent. And then finally, Russia gets to Mexico on the border, or Canada. And maybe they, overthrow a government. It's a dictator, but hey, it's a dictator. The press would be fine with that at home. We can just say, look how bad this dictator was. Look at his galleon. Look at his zoo. And then point, a puppet regime. And we can start thinking about, maybe extending NATO right up until the border. The equivalent would be Russia doing the same in Mexico, in Canada, and then America finally, after decades of this, going, no, that's it. We demand that you stop this, you back off, otherwise we're going to invade. That's the equivalent. But you don't get that equivalence in the media, do you? You get the propaganda all from one way, and it's all how bad Russia is. I was listening to Boris Johnson in his speech today saying how he's going to stand up against Vladimir Putin. What has Putin done? Like I say, who is the aggressor here? Really? Is it Russia or is it us and America? Or rather, is it America with us there hanging on to their coattails? Because we are their little bitch. And all those MPs, by the way, Tobias, I don't know whether he's got kids, but if you're that hungry for war, maybe we should send your kids over there. Get your kids an M16, send them to the front. Go on. There's no need for NATO. None. The Cold War is over. At least that's what they said. They said it was over with the breakup of the Soviet Union. But it's not, is it? It just turned into a hybrid war. Because America has to have its enemy. We have to have the enemy. It's been Russia now for what, 5-6 years? And it's morphing into China. Let me read on to prove my point. He said, meanwhile, Putin condemns NATO as the aggressor after refusing an ultimatum that he always knew would be impossible to accept. Yeah, only because Americans' hegemony means they cannot take one step backwards. Will not do it. For weeks I have predicted, he says, Russia will invade Ukraine. Conflict now seems overwhelmingly likely. Well, you know what? If you keep saying something over and over again, maybe it'll come true. The consequences will be serious, of course. From the loss of innocent life, Tobias, I highly doubt you care about the loss of innocent life, especially Ukrainian. To collapsing world stock markets and rocketing energy costs, because we haven't got that already. The West will be divided and impotent, but the wider significance is more troubling still. For Putin has been emboldened not merely by vanity, expediency and overwhelming military strength, but also through the tacit support of its Far Eastern neighbour, China. And here we go again with the fear-mongering of China. Liz Truss has been doing the same thing as well. She did it in a visit. Sorry, Liz, but you're pathetically stupid and ridiculous. In fact, none of those words come close to how the ex-Australian Prime Minister described you when he said that you were, quote, demented. Paul Keating, this is the former Australian Prime Minister, has launched a scathing attack on Britain. This is from the Australian, saying Australia's oldest ally suffers from, quote, delusions of grandeur and relevance deprivation. Yeah, no kidding. And would not be taken seriously as a player in the Indo-Pacific region. The former Prime Minister said the nation of nearly 70 million people, was led by, quote, a disreputable government. This is how we're seen by other nations around the world. Just so you know, our actions have consequences. Led by a disreputable government, he said, and labelled British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss a contender for next Prime Minister as demented. Why? Because she was basically saying if Australia don't get on board with this Cold War with China and start doing everything anti-China, which remember, Australia is pretty close to China in that region, then they're emboldening Putin. And if they don't get emboldened with the whole anti-Russian stuff, then they're emboldening China. They need their enemy. And you have to ask, why do they need their enemy? Why are they stoking up these drums of war? Well, who does it benefit? Who does all this benefit? Who does all this fear-mongering and war-mongering benefit? Does it benefit us at all? Like I said, I started this segment with, how the NHS is in crisis. I didn't even get to how the police nobody trusts them because they're all liars and rapists, seemingly. Didn't even get to the stats about rapists. Only 1 in 70 actually gets prosecuted. Only 1 in 70. I heard the Mason Greenwood tape. If you haven't heard, Mason Greenwood, the Manchester United footballer, his girlfriend recorded him. Well, only 1 in 70 instances like that actually get prosecuted. He's been arrested, but only 1 in 70. What's being done about that? Nothing. They're spending all their time beating the drums of war. How is any of this war with Russia going to help the police or the NHS or the fire service or you or me or anybody in this country? It's not at all, is it? Will it help Ukrainians? Well, no. No, it won't help Ukrainians. That's the last thing on those politicians' mind. They don't care about Ukrainians. Most of them would struggle to point it out on a map, which, by the way, I hear is a prerequisite on whether, on how sure you are as to whether we need to go to war with Russia over Ukraine, as to whether you can point to Ukraine on a map. If you can, you're probably against it. If you can't, yeah, you're all for it. Is it going to be good for Russians? Well, the Ukrainians, it's not good for them already. Their economy's tanking. There's a run on the banks. People are scared. Want to defend themselves. There's propaganda all around them. Nobody knows really what's going on. You've got all sorts of money going into, the area in eastern Ukraine where this all started when, the Americans, let's say, started meddling in their affairs and their elections. You remember Hunter Biden was on a Ukrainian energy firm getting $80,000 a month. Hunter Biden was. The links between America and Ukraine go back a long way. It's not like this has happened overnight. Who is being the aggressor here? And who would actually benefit? So we wouldn't benefit, Americans wouldn't benefit, obviously Ukrainians wouldn't benefit. Would Russians benefit? Well, no, the last thing Russia wants is a war with anybody. Last thing anybody wants is a war right now. We've just come through a pandemic. So who does benefit? Well, weapons contractors, they'll benefit, won't they? BAE Systems and Lockheed Martin and the rest of them, they'll benefit. They'll do okay, won't they? And all the people in the media right now beating the drums of war and asking the questions of people like Liz Truss and Tobias Ellwood, who have got a real hard-on for war. They just love war, don't they? Just can't wait. Gotta ramp up tensions with Russia. Ooh, scary Russia. Why have they invaded? Nobody. Who've we invaded? Well, we've invaded blah, blah, blah. Just see how ridiculous it gets. Well, they're not talking... While they're talking about all this in the media and ramping up the drums of war, what are they not talking about? Well, they're not talking about Nord Stream 2, are they? They're not talking about that pipeline that goes from Russia to Germany. Germany, by the way, sitting this one out. Strangely enough, have you noticed that? Germany, sitting this one out, not interested. But Germany's basically the heartbeat of the EU, isn't it? Weird. Well, they're not talking about Nord Stream 2 and the pipeline that goes from Russia to Germany that bypasses Ukraine. They're not talking about that, are they? They're definitely not talking, like I said, about the 80k that Hunter Biden was getting from a Ukrainian energy firm. They're not talking about that, are they? They're not talking about, the 14 countries in Europe that are part of NATO now, despite the fact that Russia were given it assurances at the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union that NATO wouldn't expand eastward towards their border. Now they're basically on their border with missiles all pointed at them for defence. They're not talking about that, are they? And they'll talk about the troop build-up, but they often won't say, oh yeah, it's actually, they keep saying on the Ukrainian border. It's the Russian border too. I'm trying to tell you all this because the airways have been flooded with anti-Russian sentiment, and I can see it, and I can see how people, get manipulated by this stuff. And I want to remind you all of how wars start, because it always starts with misinformation.
But his cover story, you see, would be that he had gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia.
This is ex-CIA explaining how wars start. But it's GCHQ as well. And this is a while ago, and the technology has changed. It's got more advanced, but the principles are still the same. Wars are always started with lies. And they're always started with the propaganda. Take a listen.
For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Times, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Times. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was. And we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims. And then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbundu women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort. Totally false propaganda.
The anti-communist, the anti-Russian sentiment is the same. You're going to see this play out in the same way as other things have played out before. They're going to try desperately to get their war. They need one. Because if there's two things America's and our economy, if you like, is built on, it's pharmaceuticals and war. Especially the American economy, and if countries like us are not going to get any more vaccinations, they're not going to be making $1,000 a second from their vaccinations, are they? So they need a war. Don't let them propagandize us into one. Spread the word on it. Don't let the media just inflict a lie on people's minds. what's happening over there on the border of Russia at the moment is as a result of NATO aggression. There's no doubt about it, over a period of decades. And it's a result of American and Western, because it always includes us. Like I say, we're America's little bitch in the UK. Just nobody's got a backbone in this country to stand up to them. Don't let them lie us into another war because they don't know what to do about the problems that we have at home. That Tobias Ellwood column,
For example, in my war,
it really was telling for me how it started. Because they always project with these things. They always inflict, a lie on the other side as to what actually they're guilty of. And his opening paragraph there says it all. Just trying to demonstrate strength because, his position at home is tenable. Death cult, says Tichoma. Yeah, I could have just said that, couldn't I? Could have saved me 10 minutes. And by the way, I mean, am I the only one who's forgotten about Afghanistan as well, by the way? It was 5 minutes ago we left Afghanistan, a 20-year war where we fought the Taliban and installed, after a 20-year war with the Taliban, we installed the Taliban. We've just got out of that war, and their country is in absolute ruins. And while it's in ruins, the United States has frozen $9.5 billion and will not release that money for them to rebuild after the United States and us have just destroyed their economy. I'd like to ask people like Tobias Ellwood, what makes you think that we should go to war with Russia? We couldn't beat the Taliban. Or was the only reason we were over there fighting in Afghanistan to just, keep match fit? This is the latest. This is in the last few days. The United Nations chief has sought humanitarian aid for millions of Afghans living in, quote, a frozen hell. That's the United Nations chief saying that. The United Nations chief urged nations on Wednesday to greatly boost humanitarian aid for millions of Afghans living in a, quote, frozen hell and release nearly $9 billion in frozen assets to pull Afghanistan's economy back from the brink of a collapse that could set off a mass exodus of people fleeing the country. Oh, great! More refugees! That's just what we need, isn't it? We haven't even dealt with the shit that we've left in Afghanistan yet, and MPs are saying we need to go into another war in Ukraine. Are you insane? Are you people just so hungry and horny for war that you cannot see the trail of destruction that we are leaving in our wake? Time is of the essence, Secretary General Antonio Guterres told the Security Council. Without action, lives will be lost and despair and extremism will grow. Let's go to war with Ukraine. Forget Afghanistan. That was so yesteryear. We couldn't beat the Taliban. Not only could we not beat them, but the Americans left them billions of weapons and planes and trucks and Humvees and all sorts behind. All they want to do is sanction Russia more. What is sanctions going to do? Putin's sitting there going, oh, okay, sanction does not matter. We change rubles for Bitcoin. We buy cheap Black Hawk helicopter from Afghans from you Yankees leave behind. Very good. That's my worst Russian accent. But you see my point. Guterres said liquidity must be urgently restored to the Afghan economy. He said that means freeing up the country's frozen currency reserves, re-engaging with its central bank and finding other ways to inject money, including allowing international funds to pay the salaries of doctors, teachers, sanitation workers, electricians and other civil servants. Tobias Ellwood, in his column, was talking about the loss of life there if we don't send NATO troops to... He doesn't care about the lives that we've destroyed in Afghanistan, does he? It was 5 minutes ago we left there. Left a trail of destruction behind. Absolutely cocked up the withdrawal beyond belief. To the point where, like, planefuls of pets were making the news. But here's our MPs banging the drums for war. I would really like to see any MP who's banging the drum for war. I would really like to see how much money that they get in funding from companies like BAE Systems. And I would like to know how much stock they've got in these, quote, defence companies. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to find something. Theresa May's husband profits from it. I'll probably find it. Oh. They've got such short memories. I could go back to Libya and Iraq and Yemen. Look at all of the problems we've got at home. Look at the mess you've got at home. Deal with that. And leave Russia and Ukraine the fuck alone, you warmongering maniacs. Fucking hell, it's like it was that Chinese guy, that Chinese reporter who said, America, UK, flush your own feces before you start talking to us about our shit. And I think that's as good a place as any to leave it on, everybody. I've done 3 or 4 little things there we can get videos from. I shall be back in the next few days, probably. Let me just make sure I've done everything. I covered everything I wanted to cover. Yes, I did. I shall be back in the next few days, probably with a live stream, and get me on TikTok. Yeah, support independent media. Please go to the website. Yeah, support me if you can. It is because of you that I can do this. I don't really get funded in any other way, so I thank you for that. Support independent media, free Julian Assange, and leave Ukraine and Russia the F alone. Let's start sorting our own shit out, shall we? And start concentrating on our own problems before we start making a ton more. You know, else in other countries. Up. Ellie says goodbye. She always comes to say goodbye at the end of the stream, doesn't she? All right, take care, everybody. Love you all.